Welcome everyone. I'm Heather Welch from EDX Education, and today we're in conversation with Dr. Paul Swan. We're tackling times tables, which, Paul, I have to tell you, I'm really excited about this because my son and I love playing multi-spin. It's one of our favourite games, and you know what, his timetables have become very fluent, and it's something that he's actually really enjoyed learning. So today, just to let everyone know, it's our fourth webinar, and so if you're looking at the previous webinars on place value, we've done some tips with calculators and just general home schooling for mathematics. Please go on to either Dr. Paul Swan's website, so it's www.drpaulswan.com.au. And also for today, if you're interested in following with grid paper and a pencil, best thing you can do is download the grid paper. If you have time, it's drpaulswan.com.au/webinar. And award-winning author and education specialist, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you, Dr. Paul Swan, for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Heather. Appreciate the nice introduction and so forth. There's a bit of a storm brewing where we are, so if the power suddenly goes out, you'll appreciate we'll have to do a few little changes. So just to keep everyone on track a little bit, we've made a small PowerPoint as well. So we'll be flipping through a few different screens as we go along the way. And so sometimes you might see a PowerPoint slide, sometimes my face and sometimes my hand. So hopefully that will make sense. And as Heather already mentioned, probably the #1 tool that we'll be using today is some grid paper. So I'd just like to take you through a few of the basic ideas, and hopefully most of this you can replicate at home or in the school environment. So let's just start with the first idea. You need some sort of plan. So I just want to show you, you mentioned it before in a previous webinar, we mentioned about the addition facts milestones. Well, this time we're looking at multiplication and relating to division. You're welcome to download these. These just give a bit of an order or a progression in which way that you might tackle some of these tables and so forth. But I'd like to begin with the start, obviously. And the first set of tables we're going to look at is the 0 and 1s. And that might seem pretty basic, but I'll explain why we're going to do that. So just if you have a look at the next slide, it'll show you that if you look at the facts, anything multiplied by 0, and you might notice on my slide there, I'm going to 10 by 10. I appreciate that in other countries, quite often we go to 12 times 12. And even in other countries go to 20 times 20. But I'll make some comments about 11 and 12 as we go along as well. But if you look there, the facts where you multiply something by nothing, there actually, if you look at the green idea, there are 21 different facts just taken up in that idea that if I multiply by nothing, I end up with nothing. And then if you look at, if I multiply by 1, I end up with the number itself. There's another 19 facts. So in fact, you've already done 40 facts of the 100 that are to be done. I just want to now take us across to the screen, and I'll show you just on grid paper one little idea that helps children understand that sort of thing. So if you just have a look, we're going to focus on the grid that's on the screen there. And essentially with that grid there, it's just standard 10mm grid that we're going to look at. And I'm just going to show you 1 or 2 ideas. So all I'm going to do is draw on this. You could have any grid paper would be fine. In fact, if you don't have this right on wipe off sort of grid, then you can always slide some into, say, one of these pockets that you can get. You might have seen them before. And basically, you just slide the bit, you can download this and you just slide it into something like this. But we're going to play just on this one here. And often I meet children who don't quite understand the idea that something multiplied by nothing is nothing. And partly that's because when you have 4 and 0, 4 plus 0, it's 4. So they can't understand why 4 times 0 isn't 4. So I like to get them to do a bit of drawing. So I'll show you what I mean. And as we go along, we'll look at some more drawings that we can make. So if you have a look at the grid, what I do, I ask children to draw rectangles. Now, the fancy name for those rectangles is called an array, but that's the word that we use in mathematics, but we're just talking rectangles. And I say, hey kids, can you draw me a rectangle that's 7 by 0? And they start going, and then, oh, they realize they can't. Or I say, can you draw me a rectangle that's 0 wide, but 6 down? And they start to try and do it, but soon they realize that they can't actually draw that rectangle. And that helps them understand that anything multiplied by 0 is 0. So that's a pretty key idea that's sitting there. So just a reminder, once you understand that anything multiplied by 0 is 0, you would know 21 facts. So if we go back to the slide, we'll identify them for you. And as we go along, we'll look at this sort of grid. So there's the 21 facts that we would know. And you're saying, hang on, I can't see 21 there or on the 19. And the reason for that is we need to know one other idea. And that's called the commutative property of multiplication, generally called the turnaround fact. So let's just have a look at how we might develop this idea. And basically, we're going to use some things that you could find in most kitchens. Now, I'll probably be in trouble for this because our muffin tray has been well used. But here's a muffin tray that you'll be able to have a look at. And I'll show you an example of what it is. And if you don't have a muffin tray, we'll look at some other possibilities. So here's a muffin tray. My wife's a wonderful cook, so it's a well-used muffin tray. Now, in this case here, this is this rectangle idea. This is this array idea that we keep talking about. And essentially, if I look at that muffin tray again, I'm going to talk about it in a certain way. I'm going to refer to the rows. So if you have a look at the muffin tray now, you'll see that it's made up, there's a row of 2, another row of 2, and another row of 2. So we would say this has 3 rows of 2 or 6 muffins. Now watch what's going to happen. I'm going to literally turn that around. And as I turn it around, we've still got 6 muffins, but now we've got 2 rows of 3. So there's 3 in each row, 2 rows of 3, but there are still 6 muffins. So essentially, this is a key idea. Once children understand that 3 2s and 2 3s will give me the same result, that almost halves the number of table facts you need to know. Now, let's say you don't have a muffin tray at home. Then there's a couple of alternatives. I just raided our fridge a few moments ago, and you'll see there, I've just put the same sort of thing there. That's just an egg carton. So you might have 3 rows of 2, 2 rows of 3, we've got 6 eggs. We could cut an egg carton in all sorts of different ways to do that. Now, let's say you don't even have that sort of thing. You could grab some grid paper. So earlier today, I cut some grid paper up, and let's just have a bit of a look, and you'll see the same sort of idea. So we just use the 20mm grid paper for this. But in this case here, you can see that I've got 5 rows of 2. But when I turn that paper, I now have 2 rows of 5, but I've still got 10. It's a pretty fundamental idea. Now, the next slide will sort of show you how fundamental that is. If you look at this muffin tray again, just in the slide that we've got, and have a look at the green part of the chart that we put there. If you get this idea, so this one happens to be 4 rows of 3 and 3 rows of 4, once we get that idea, you can start to see, wow, all those green facts are repeated on the other side. It almost halves the number of facts we've got. So before we sort of launch into a lot of this, already the children know the 0 times facts, the multiply by 1 facts, and if we can get this turnaround idea, it starts to make the job of learning tables a bit easier. Now, just to help you a little bit, we put a few games up that you might like to use, and we'll show you a couple of examples, and I'll take you through a basic idea of how to play. So I'll just put one here on the sheet, and then I'm going to actually play on the plastic that we had before, but we'll just have a look here. So this is the arrays game, and as I said, an array is just another name for a rectangle. So it's all about rectangles that we have here, but the technical name is an array. So what we've designed is a very simple game, and it starts with very basic table facts. So this one here would have multiplying by 2 or multiplying by 10. We have a whole series of these. I'll just show you another one so you get the idea. So in this one here, you'll see this one is multiplying by 2, multiplying by 5, multiplying by 10, and multiplying all those numbers, including the 0. So let me show you how you might play this. So I'm just going to use a whiteboard grid just to save a bit of paper and so forth, and just a whiteboard pen. Now, you don't need to use those that we've done. You could use 2 dice, so I could use these 2 dice. But when I'm using dice, I always use 2 different coloured dice. And the reason is I want to continually refer to the idea of rows. So if you have a look at the game, and I'll draw it and I'll show you how we play. Okay, so in this case, we're obviously using 6-sided dice, so we're only going to the 6 times table, but we can extend that later. I'm always going to call the white first, and so I'm going to say 4 rows of 5. That's what that's showing me here. So then what I would need to do, imagine there's 2 players, so it's my turn. I just threw 4 rows of 5. So now we're going across rows of 5. and I'm going down 4. So I've now made 4 rows of 5. You can see the build up of the rectangle. Now, for some children, what they're trying to get is the dimensions. That's 4 by 5, and I asked them to draw them that way. But also, while they're drawing it, once they've drawn it, I like them to write in it. So I'll show you what I like them to write into this game, and just see as we go. So essentially here, so we've now got 4 rows of 5. So in that little box, I'm going to write 4 5s, 20. Because basically the way this game works is the second player has a shot, and they might do 3 rows of 2, and they draw their rectangle or array, and then the next player does the same, and the next player does the same. At the end of, say, so many turns, maybe 5 or 6 turns each, they actually have to work out how much area they've covered. And so what I don't want them doing is counting all the little squares all the time. I want them to add up bits that are in there. So let's just go back to the game for a moment, and we'll look at it again a little bit. So imagine someone else is having a turn, and this time I'm rolling the dice, and this time I might have got, let me give you 6, and we'll do 6 rows of 2. And they start to see, in this version of the game, you can put your rectangle anywhere. Later on, we're going to change the rules a little bit. So 6 rows of 2, so rows always go across, so they're going to be 6 by 2, and I'm going to come down, there's 3, 4, 5, so I've checked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and away I go. And now I've got 6 rows of 2, and I might have to turn that around a little bit to put 6 2s of 12. Now, after a while, when playing this game, and it doesn't happen overnight, I can't kid you about that. After a while playing this game, sometimes children are going to throw 5 rows of 4. They've already got 4 rows of 5, and then they do 5 rows of 4, and they'll suddenly realise that, hang on, 5 rows of 4 and 4 rows of 5 covers the same area. I've captured the same area. And so what we're doing is linking into that idea of the turnaround facts. Now, that's not going to happen for every child. And so here's what I tend to do. So for some children, the penny will drop, but for others, we need to just take them a step further. So here's the next bit I would do. So I take you back to the game itself. After they've been playing for a while, and they would have much more on here, I start to do things like I come around and I just turn it around. And now we've got 5 rows of 4 in that spot there, which happens to be exactly the same amount as 4 rows of 5. And so we're building that idea, this commutative property. So where does this turnaround facts come from? Things like muffin trays, anything that's a rectangle, a grid, and so forth. So if we go back to the game, we'll just show you on the there, we would play for a while. Now, later on, I can change the rules. I might make the rule is you've always got to link up to one that's already there. Generally, we play in 2 colours, and sometimes I only use half a sheet. So if we take you back to the PowerPoint, just to help you out a little bit, because you may not have various dice and so forth, you will see that we've made this one, and it actually goes right from 0 to 9. Because when we were just playing with dice there, that was just 1 to 6, but we can build that sort of idea that happens. So we can substitute different dice. So for example, I can use the ones that have 0 and 9 on them and so forth. That happened there. So when we made those array games for you, we just put the spinner in. And just a reminder, I talked earlier before, but let me just remind you. So let's have a look here. At home, all you need to do is grab a paper clip. And a paper clip and a pen will allow you to do the spinning around that. And so you don't need any specialist dice, and you've got the grid paper already. So that's why we've created it. Let's just go back to this idea of this arrays or grids, because when you're learning the tables, there's a few tricks and tips that will help a little bit here. So that's one of them. Once we've got this rectangle idea, we can turn it around. We can sort of almost halve the number of facts we need to learn. But let's go back to our grids before that we had, because one strategy that you can use to learn the tables is a thing called doubling. In other words, you see how one thing links or doubles to another. So I'm going to just put some grid paper up on the screen there for a moment, and then we'll take you into the slide in a minute just to formalize that sort of thing. So on the grid right now, just a reminder, so we've got 5 rows of 2, that's 10 squares. If I turn it that way, it'd be 2 rows of 5. That's what we've got. Now, if we're going to do an idea of doubling, children need to see what a double is. So a double is literally this. I now doubled, and now I have, if you look here, 5 rows of 4, which is actually just double what 5 rows of 2 was. So if I've got 10, I double 10, I get 20. So 5 4s would give me 20. But let's have a look. You could do it this way. So suddenly I've made now, in this case here, 10 rows of 2. And so we've doubled in that other way. Now, some people use language like double and double double. So let me give you an example here. So I've now had 5 2s to begin with, which has become 5 4s, which is double a lot of 5 2s. And if I double again, wow, now I've got 5 8s. And so I had 10, then I had 20, double 20 gives me 40. So now I've got 5 8s of 40. So that's an idea of doubling. So quite often when I talk about strategies for learning basic multiplication facts, I do doubling. Now, if we just go, we'll show you the slide that's got this on it, and you can see that sort of idea. So basically we cut things out, and you can look at the slide there, and it's this doubling idea, and it's about the rows. And you can see, if you look inside there, you can spot all the different rectangles or arrays that are coming up there. Now, some schools use a system like this. It's a cluster method of teaching tables. So they would teach you the 2s, then the 4s, then the 8s, and the 3s and the 6s and the 12s if you're going there, using this doubling idea. So you start with the 2s, double to get the 4s, double again to get the 8s, likewise with the 3, 6 and 9. And so I just wrote that little book called Dice Games for Tables, is really about that idea. So now you've laid a lot of foundation with the arrays, we've learnt the zeros, the ones, the turnaround facts, you've played some other games and so forth. Now what I'd like to do is just identify some of the really hard table facts. So we'll bring that up for you on a slide. Essentially, there seems to be some that cause children a lot of trouble, and so we've listed them for you there. Now, within this, there's some obvious patterns. The hardest table fact for children and adults to learn is 7 8s of 56. When they polled people, there's one that was done in the UK, 25% of adults had trouble with 7 8s of 56. So you'll notice that a couple of the other facts there are like the 9 times table, or there's things like square numbers. So I'd just like to look at a couple of those now, and we'll go with a different way of looking at. So we looked at doubles, so now let's look at the idea of patterns. And the way we'll do patterns is I'll use a little chart, and we'll show you a picture of it in a minute, but I just want to show you a number board and talk that through a little bit in here. So we've got a number board here. It goes up to 120. That's not such a big deal at the moment, but what we want to do is look at some patterns. So what I'm going to do is lay some counters, and this is easy enough to replicate. And we put an example of this sort of board up that you can download as well. You don't necessarily need to put counters like I'm putting on at the moment, but you could just shade them or color them and so forth. So I'll take you back, and you can see what's happening here, and you'll see a pattern. And so one way that we can look at table facts is to look at patterns. So you'll start to notice that a pattern is developing here, and you see it's going diagonally. So from the top right, it's coming down across this way here, and you'll see it probably better on the picture that we can show you as well. But let's talk about that pattern. There's a bundle of patterns that sit inside here. Let's pick one. Okay, so the 9 times table is like knowing the 10s and subtracting 1. So for example, 2 9s are 2 10s take 2. 3 9s are 3 10s take 3. 4 9s are 4 10s take 4. So that's one pattern. In terms of linking to things like divisibility, because we're linking multiplication and division, you might notice that when you add those numbers, so if we go up to the slide, we'll show you an example on there. If you have a look at the slide, you'll see there that it's got 9, 18, 27, 36, and so forth. If you add those digits, like 18, 1 and 8's 9. If you add 27, 2 and 7's 9. If you add 3 and 6, 3 and 6 is 9. So any of the 9 times table, the pattern has to continue that the digits add to 9. Now, the reason I like to go beyond 100, and I'll show you what I mean here, if you look at the bottom of that board, it goes 117, for example. Well, if you add 1 and 1 and 7, that's also 9. So if 99, it's 9 and 1, 9 and 9's 18, and 1 and 8's 9. So that pattern exists. That sits nicely. So patterns are another really good way of starting to look at this idea of how to learn the table facts. I just want to mention one pattern that it's interesting that I find many children struggle with. So we'll just show you an example, and it also links to the language of mathematics. So we'll just put you, I'll show you on the visualizer just how this will look, and you'll start to see how it develops. So I take the same grid. Remember I said to you, the grid is your friend here, and I'm going to draw a few arrays, and you'll recognize these straight away, but you'll be surprised how many children have trouble with this idea, okay? So the arrays or the rectangles I'm going to draw have these dimensions. So I'll draw a couple for you. Here's one. I'm drawing one that is 3 by 3. I'm going to draw another one that is 4 by 4. And I'll draw another one just for good measure. That's, we'll just make it 5 by 5. Now, there's something about those. You'll notice that the array or the picture or the rectangles is a particular sort of rectangle. It's a square. Now, many children I meet, particularly those struggling with tables, don't get the idea when I talk about square numbers. They're not linking that it's square, instead that when you put the same dimensions, the rectangle will be a square. It also has a bit of a focus here in terms of the factors will be the same. So something like 16, the factors will be 4 by 4. So the factors are exactly the same. And some children have trouble with that. And I tend to use the phrase factor, factor, and product so they get used to the language of that mathematics that happens here. So now, essentially, we've given a few tips and tricks about some of these key things, but it also gets down to you have to learn some stuff. Because one of the other strategies is you use one fact that you know to learn a new fact. So what that implies is you have to have built up a bank of facts. Now, this can be a bit boring. Heather mentioned earlier that some children find this a bit tedious. So that's why I tend to make lots of games to do this sort of stuff. So I'll give you an example. You probably will see on the screen this building a bank of facts. We've put up 3 games called Multi-Spin 10, 11, and 12. So if you want to go there, there's just sitting up on the web for you. But I'll just show you one example of a game called Multi-Spin. It's a pretty simple idea. We find it easier, particularly if you're working at home, to have pretty simple gear. So I'll just show you multi-spin, how it works. Once I show you one game of multi-spin, you will know how all of them work. So the one I've chosen, if you have a look on the visualizer here, is multi-spin 2. There's multi-spin 3, 4, 5, right up to 9 as well. And as the name implies, it wasn't terribly inventive of me, but basically whatever I spin on the spinner, I'm going to multiply by 2. So in this case here, let's call it 2 times 1. So in this point here, 2 times 1 is 2, and I've put my red counter there. Now, the other player will be the yellow player, and when I'm playing these sort of games, I like maximum turns per minute, so quite often they're just 2 or 3 player games. So I'm going to spin again, and I've spun, and I just happen to spin a 9, and you'll see where I'm going to place my counter now. So I've spun 9, and I'm always multiplying by 2, so now I'm doing 2 9s are 18. Now you might notice I could put my counter here, or I could put it here, but I'm going to choose to put it here because the aim of this game is to get 3 or 4 of your counters in a row. And so in this case here, I'm trying to block this person's move that's happening here. Now you notice 0 features on here as well, just to remind the kids that anything multiplied by 0 is 0. Now, just a small point, some people may not realize, but I designed these to be color-coded. So there's a game, multi-spin, but there's pretty well the same game. It's called spin div. So it's about division. Now, in this case here, whatever I spin up on the spinner, I divide by 2. So I've just spun here and I spun up an 8. So 8 divided by 2 is 4. And so I put my counter on 4. So it's the related fact that happens there. Now, a couple of things here, we'll just focus you a little bit. Sitting in here, I'll get you to have a look at the spin div again, and I'll put this right into your screen so it's nice and clear. When children are learning things like dividing by 2, we could also start bringing the language of half, or we could be multiplying by 0.5. So we try to make those links in this sort of game. And so a key idea to when you're doing the table facts is trying to link as much as possible. So let's look at another strategy or two. So you need to build a bank of facts. Now, the reason you need to build this bank of facts is because sometimes you're trying to learn a new fact. And so that's taking you from the known facts to the unknown. So the bigger the bank of facts you have, the more you can use. So remember we mentioned before that one of the hardest table facts to learn is 7/8. But most kids, those 6/8 are 48. It sort of trips off the tongue a little bit there. So in this case here, could I use the fact that I know 6/8 to work out what 7/8 are? And it's this array thing. Well, I could add one more 8. So 6/8 are 48. I add 8 on, that makes it 50, and then 6 more, 56. So that's why we want to spend a time building up a bank of facts so we can then make more facts. It's like the rich get richer, so to speak. Now, let's look at a couple of other games to make some links and so forth and just show you how it works. So I'm going to use some things called pocket dice. You could do something similar. You could do something similar with spinners, but pocket dice just gives another variety. And I'm going to feature a division game because mostly we tend to focus on multiplication, and we need to link multiplication and division. And so I'll make this comment here. So I'm going to put 2 pocket dice on the screen so you can have a look. Now, pocket dice, you basically just insert, you slide in some bits here, and they slide in and out, so you can change it so you can see it goes in and out. And in this case here, I've got some numbers on this side, and on this side I've got divide by 2, divide by 4, and divide by 8. But some of your children may not be up to that, so you could have all divide by 2 because these numbers will still work. Or you could just have divide by 2 and divide by 4, not divide by 8. So this allows you to sort of differentiate or change according to the needs of the children. Now, I've chosen those numbers on the second dice to be multiples of 8. So let me explain how this works. So I'll take you back to the visualizer and you can have a bit of a look. So in this case here, for example, I might have done, let's pick an example. Here we go. I've rolled up here 32 and we're going to divide it by 4. And so actually that's really 4/8 of 32. So you see how it links together. Now, in this case, if I've done 32 and I divide by 4, I would be on 8 points. Another player could do the same and so forth. Now, you could take the same dice because basically I like to take the same idea and just rework it slightly differently. Let's take the same dice now. Let me show you an example. If I change this number to 33, we can now be using division with a remainder, which is not one of our topics today, but just shows how quickly it can change. Let me show you one other example. If we understand dividing by 4, then we can start making some substitutions. For example, I could slide into this pocket dice 1/4 of, and so now we're going to do 1/4 of 32. So it's still the same basic fact that's underlying it. What I'm trying to do is link it to as many different versions of the same thing. So basically, one of the key ideas that we're talking about here is to go what's called fact families. And so that's what we were doing with the pocket dice. So I always teach the children, depends whether you want to do the fractions or not. I like to do the fractions, but it's up to you. So I teach if you learn one thing, you get 5 things free. So if you've gone all the effort to learn 7/8 of 56, then by that turnaround, remember with the grids that we had before, the arrays, we turn around the muffin tray, then you should know 8 7s of 56. To keep it in your mind, then I'd like to link it to a fact called 56 divided by 7, 56 divided by 8. Now, as you get older, it'd be 1/7 of 56 is 8, and 1/8 of 56 is 7. We'd make those links explicit. Now, the way I do that is games. It just happens I've used pocket dice. You could do spinner games. You could do all sorts of things that link here. So really the key message that I wanted to give today is really you build a bank of facts, you use some strategies. So we've talked about the array. The array builds the idea of the commutative property. We've talked about doubling. We've talked about linking to patterns. Remember, we looked at the 9 times pattern and so forth. Because one thing's very clear to me, no 2 children learn quite the same way. So the pattern might appeal to someone else. They might spot that pattern. Other children like to play the games because it builds up the bank of facts. They get more confident, so then they can learn new facts and so forth. For some children, they never actually make the links that we just talked about between the multiplication and the division. And that's why I wanted to sort of call this seminar not just about tables, but trying to make those links. So remember, you learn one fact, you get 5 things free. That's pretty well the key thing that I wanted to get across. So hopefully there's a few extra ideas there, Heather. I hope that's a useful thing for you and William.
Paul, thank you so much for today. And thank you to your team. We had many screens there. We had the showing of the games, we had the PowerPoint, and we have you talking in the background. So I know that's a lot to actually put together, so we really appreciate it. I know there's many parents and teachers that will appreciate all the facts, as you said, the dice games, the doubling, the arrays. I actually look forward to challenging my 9-year-old with some of those games because he quite likes it. But if anyone's interested, we'll have the videos up hopefully by the end of the week on drpaulswan.com.au. Is it /home learning? Is that correct?
Could be. I don't run any of that. My team does all of that. They make me look good. We'll also put the PowerPoint up as well, so they can refer to that if they wish. And the download.
Fantastic. We'll also have it up on our website, which is edxeducation.com, and just look at the videos. But thank you so much for everyone joining us today. And Paul, again, absolutely wonderful. And we'll see you next Monday.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, Paul. Thank you everyone for attending. Bye.